Hello, this is John Diaz, and we'll walk through using Postman to explore the vRealize Operations Manager 6 REST API. So at the beginning of my blog post, I recommended that you go ahead and get Postman installed. It's just an extension of Chrome. And that you also download the Postman collection that I linked in my blog. So assuming you've done that and you have an environment to practice against, I'll show you how it's done. So we'll go to our applications, start Postman, and the first thing I'll do is walk you through installing the collection, which is fairly simple to do. All you have to do is import, and then you can download from link, and there's my link from the article, or if you downloaded it, you can just do the file or paste the raw text. It's just a JSON file. So I'll import that. It worked. Confirmation. Close that, and now I have my vRealize 6 operations, vRealize Operations Manager 6 REST calls. So I give you 5 different types of requests here. Just before we get started, a couple of things to point out. You'll notice that I have in the request URL, there is a VROPS, it's between 2 curly braces in the URL. And that's because I'm using an environment in Postman so that I don't have to type out the entire fully qualified domain name for my VROps instance. I can just use my VROps environment. And just to show you what that looks like, this VROps variable, which I'm using here for the URL, is just the name of my vRops server. So this is nice if you have multiple environments that you were connecting to run these REST calls. You could just set up a different environment for each one. And then you have things like your user password set up also. So another thing to point out is also the authorization for this is going to be basic, and I'm using that same environment, those environment local variables for the username and password. And I always do this save helper data to request so that I don't have to keep updating this every time I want to send a new request. In the headers, the authorization header is automatically added for you, so that'll just get you connected and logged in. And then you'll also need to make sure that you have, if you expect to get JSON back, which is what I'll be doing in this tutorial, is working with the JSON that is returned. You'll want this accept header with the value of application /JSON. I can also set that up as a preset so that I don't have to type the key and the value in every time. So you can have, actually, this is useful if you have a lot of different header presets that you want to use. In my case, it's pretty simple. Application JSON is the only header that we'll be using. So we'll use these throughout. It's just kind of a way to get you started. And another thing that you'll want to know is if you're using self-signed certificates, when you run a REST call, you may get some kind of an error. Usually an error due to not having a trusted certificate. So the easiest way around that is to just basically go ahead and connect to your vRops server and see here I have invalid certificate, and I can just go through the steps in Chrome to say, yeah, I know what I'm doing, I accept the risk. And then once you do that in Chrome, since this is a Chrome extension, then your REST calls will work. So just make sure that you don't have to log all the way in, just make sure you accept the certificate. You could also import the certificate. I just find it easier to do it that way. Okay, before we dig into these, I want to show you the documentation and how to get to that. So the documentation for the vRealize Ops API can be found on your appliance, your vRealize Operations Manager appliance at Suite API. So this URL, suite-API, and then you have the documentation here. Really what we're going to be focused on is using, they have clients down here, Python client, Ruby, Java, but what we'll be dealing with is just the REST API documentation itself. So you click to go to that, and then it's nicely laid out. You have all the different API endpoints with the different methods that they have. So you can see there's a ton of stuff that you can do. You can obviously look through this on your own. Another thing that you'll see are like internal or experimental REST calls. Note, may not be supported in future releases. So while you may want to play around with these, you can, I wouldn't build any production, scripts or workflows using those because you just don't know if they're going to be included in the next release. The model representations are really helpful. We'll touch on that a little bit in this one. I'll probably end up doing an advanced tutorial to show you kind of how to use that. But if you have to build out a payload to do something like add a new alert, you may want to look at the the alert properties so that you can see what all is included in an alert. So things like the alert ID, resource ID, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So at any rate, going back to our documentation, it's kind of also helpful to understand some of the constructs or concepts within vRealize operations. And one of those, of course, is the adapters that point to the different environments or endpoints. So there's vSphere adapter, for the VMware stuff. There's adapters for storage. There's adapters for just basically anything you would monitor. Then you have, of course, alerts. You have users that you can modify. You have collectors. You have credentials that will be used with adapters. Events, maintenance schedules, notifications, resources is another big one, and that's primarily what we'll be working with today is resources and adapters. You can even create and modify supermetrics and so forth. So a lot of stuff in here. Again, I don't want to dwell on this documentation, but just to give you an idea of where you can go to kind of look and get some ideas of things that you can do. Okay, going back, what we'll start with is this get resources. So in the documentation that we were just looking at, so in the resources section, if we go to get resource, it shows us, basically you can get a resource, but you need to know the resource ID. Well, that would be helpful if you actually knew that. But there's actually a way to just get all of the resources and have those, and then be able to extract the particular resource that you need and then query it specifically. And it's a lot easier than you would think. So we'll start off with this REST call here. We're going to get API resources from the resources endpoint. So let's go in. All right, so again, HTTPS are variable for the FQDN of the server, Suite API, and then you need API resources, just like it says in the documentation. We've got our authorization set up, our application JSON accept header set up, and then when we click send on that REST call, what will be returned is a JSON payload, and we've got it formatted in kind of the pretty format. Now, if this is a little hard for you to read, if you're not used to working with JSON and it's hard to keep up with the columns, I know it is for me a lot of the times. What I like to do is just select all of that and copy it, and then there is a website that I like to use to format that for you, and it's JSONviewer.stack.hu is one I like to use. And then when that comes up, what you can do is just paste that JSON text in there, and then you have a nice viewer that kind of formats it for you so that you can kind of get into a little easier to read format. So when we're looking at this, we see the resource list, we see the identifier. So that's that identifier that to pull a specific resource. There's the identifier that we would need to do that. But let me show you this, because this makes it a lot easier. In the links section of a given resource, you have an href that is basically giving you the endpoint URL for that specific resource. So this href is pointing back to itself. So if you wanted to create a REST call that looked specifically for this given resource, then you could just use just copy and paste that. Or if you're using Postman, there's actually an easier way to do that, and I'll show you just in a second. But these are helpful. Always look for these links and the hrefs, because they're some of the more common things that you would look for. Like, for example, I want to see the alerts of this resource. I want to see symptoms of that resource, events. So all the things that you may have to go and look through the documentation to figure out how to get. This is a good starter for you to pull those. Okay, so going back to Postman, and we'll just scroll down to where those links are. If you're viewing this in Postman, once you get a little comfortable with it, and by the way, there is a search option here, so you can search for a particular a machine. So I've got one called Demo, for example. Demo 063 is a virtual machine. So I don't have to scroll through all this. I can just use the search capability. And then when I find, the link for that I would like to use, I say, well, I want to see, if there are any alerts for this, or I want to see the relations of this resource. All I have to do is go to that href and click on it, and then Postman will automatically build that out for me. And then the only thing that I need to do is add my authorization header. So I'll update my request with my authorization header. And then this is why I have the preset for the JSON. Okay, so I have those two in there. Send that. And then I get my relationships. And let's just copy that. Select all. Copy. And we'll go out to our JSON viewer. Let's clear that out. Okay, not that big, not that much information, but this is, basically, here are the links, and then here's, the resource list. Actually, probably not a good example because it's not showing any relationships, but hopefully you get the point on that one. Okay, and I think this is actually a resource that is no longer active. That's probably why it wasn't giving any. So just something else to be aware of. Now, another way to, if you want to get the resource directly without, getting all the resources and doing a search within all that JSON, the JSON body, what you can do is you can formulate a GET with a query. And so in this case, I'm doing resources and then a question mark name, and then IaaS, which is my IaaS server. And just to show you, how I learned to do that basically was, by looking at the documentation and seeing that, oh, there's a query. I can query for the name. I can query by regex. I can query adapter kinds, all these things that I can use to basically find, you can get really creative or interesting with this. It's like, by parent ID. If I know the parent ID and I want to query all the resources that are children. If I want to do by some property, name and value, I can do that. But the simple use case that I have for this is just to do the name. So we'll do the name, send that, and then we'll get, the total count. The return was 1 because I only have one VM with that name, or one resource. It happens to be a VM, and then it returns that. So name is IaaS, and then of course again I get all this information, and then I also get these nice href links that I can leverage or utilize, if I wanted to look at symptoms, stat, what stat keys are available, etc. Now, the next thing that you may want to do when you're kind of exploring this is look at the different adapter kinds. So it gets a little, the wording here gets a little confusing, so that's why I have get adapter types. That's the way I kind of refer to them. But in the vocabulary of VROps, it's adapter kinds. So you want to know what adapter kinds are available or installed in the given system. You can just run this query, this get command, and it'll return the different ones. And again, with those href links that you can just click on, and notice that I have some, they're a little bit different. So for this adapter kind, this Python remediation vCenter adapter, I can find all the resource kinds that are available for that. So that's good to know too, what resource kinds are available. So let's explore that. So we're going to update our header with the authorization, add our JSON, accept. By the way, if you don't do the JSON, it'll still work. The default is to return it as XML. So quite frankly, if if you'd rather work with XML, you're more familiar with that, you can do that and then just change your view mode down here to format it for XML. But anyway, so we get our information back, and we can see that the different types of resource kinds. This is actually probably really not interesting one. Let's do that again, but do it for the vCenter adapter. So let's go. Okay, so adapter kinds, VMware, resource kinds, and then we'll do our authorization, JSON, and okay, this is actually a little bit, so 19 different types of resources. So we'll select that, copy, and then let's look at that in our JSON viewer. Oops. And see, kind of see what we have in there. Hopefully you're getting an idea for how this all kind of builds on itself. So, here's the resource type general, compute resource, cluster compute resource. Then you have links for each of those too, right? So here's the link to that, resource kind, the stat keys that are available for that resource kind, and so forth. Now, one thing I would point out here, unlike the resources that use, kind of a globally unique ID, the adapters and resource kinds, adapter kinds, resource kinds, they don't do that. They use just like a user-friendly or human readable identifier. So just be aware of that. If you're looking for an ID for those types of objects, there are none. They're just kind of the human readable ones. So the only other thing that I would show you in this tutorial is some of the more complex things that you can do. For example, if you wanted to find adapter instances for a particular type. So remember I said those adapter kinds they don't use GUIDs, they use just human readable. So once you know the adapter kind VMware, for example, that you want to pull from, you can use a git command like this, to actually get information about that adapter, about any adapter instances. And the difference between the adapter instance and the adapter kind is the adapter instance is actually a configured, instance of that. So, for example, this is VC vApp MyLab Diaz, which points to my, that's my vCenter, basically. This is important because if you're looking for a resource, you may want to, limit that search by the adapter instance if you have multiple vCenters out there that you're connecting to. But hopefully, so this should get you, started in exploring between, using the, few little requests that I put in the collection here, and then the documentation itself. You should, and also the JSON viewer. You should start to get an idea for some of the things that you can do, and then as time allows, I'll be sure to update this video or add another video that gets into some more complex things, like, for example, pushing an event into the system, so that you could do that as part of a script. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching.